All right. Hello, everyone. Can we all see and hear me without any issue? Very good. All right. So let's get the screen share going. And then we're going to dive into Kim Chapter 2, which is all about substance dualism. Well, not all about substance dualism, but it primarily concerns substance dualism. So we're going to overview what exactly substance dualism is in more detail than we've done so far. We're going to take a look at some epistemological and some metaphysical arguments for substance dualism. And then we will look at some of the problems that substance dualism suffers from. So um, let's dive into it. Now, um, I'm curious, how many of you took a stab at reading the meditations? Briefly, okay. Kaya read last year. Good. Excellent. Paul, Holly, Leo. Sophia attempted. That's good. That's good. An attempt is good. Remember, if you start reading it and you're like, "Hey, I don't know what the heck is happening here," you can always go back to them after this lecture. Rossum looked, Samantha, yeah, Holly, yeah, they are fun. Descartes is one of those thinkers um, who I disagree with a lot. When it comes to quite a lot of what he says, I disagree with a lot of it. But gosh darn it, I really love reading him. He's an excellent writer. Yeah, Samuel, that's fair. The textbook chapter is brutal. I said this would be technical, right? Yeah, Samantha, I'm glad you brought that up. The optimistic, pessimistic annotations. I want to be clear. That's how it's structured. Like that's kind of, Descartes moves between being maybe a bit more skeptical and a bit more hopeful about what he's able to ascertain about the mind and the body and about well, really in the first meditation and to a great extent in the second meditation, he's not just concerned with metaphysics but with epistemology, right? But those little headings are added by the editor. So that's something to keep in mind, right? He didn't actually write it out that way, but the editor has placed those little markers there so that we can keep track of the sort of I guess if you really think about it, it's almost like a dialectical sort of thing that he's doing, right? A sort of answer, a sort of a call and response or conversation between his hopeful self and his doubtful self, right? So just keep that in mind if you're reading this. In other versions, other translations of the meditations that I have read, the translators and the editors don't do this, but I thought it was neat that they did it here. Yeah, I agree. It does make it a lot easier to follow. Um, so, again, and this goes for the optional readings as well as the recommended readings. I mean, I do think it's very important to come to class having read them or at least having attempted to read them. But if you're really like, wow, I don't really know what's going on here, you definitely revisit them after I have lectured on them, right? And meditations one and two, I think, are good for setting the stage. Kim also, toward the end of the chapter, talks a bit about some of the stuff that Descartes says in meditation number six, as well as passions of the soul, which you absolutely don't have to read. But if you're up for it, I highly encourage you to go and find those sources. You can find these sources for free online because they're in the public domain. All right, so let's return to a question that we've kind of considered before, right? Well, I mentioned it in the first overview lecture, and we got into it a little bit more in the introduction lecture in our look at Kim's first chapter. And that question is, what is it to have a mind? Now, for the ancients, like Plato or Aristotle, having a mind means having a soul. Now, um, we have to be careful when we say having a soul. That makes it sound like a soul is something that we possess, like having an arm, right? And sure, a lot of traditional outlooks look at it like this. The soul is, if I can again paraphrase Gilbert Ryle's sort of sardonic assessment of Descartes' philosophy, the soul is a ghost in the machine. So if the body is a machine, the ghost is like the pilot of that machine. Plato thought of the soul, or at least the rational soul, somewhat like the driver of a chariot or the captain of a ship, right? And the idea is the chariot or the ship is the body, the captain or the driver is the soul. But in I think to really properly understand what it means to have a soul is not to say that a soul is something we possess, something we have, like the way we have arms and legs. Rather, we are souls. For Plato, the soul was an immaterial, divine, incorruptible, imperishable entity that was essentially you. You, if you're a Platonist, you are a soul. Likewise for Descartes, what you really are is a soul or a mind. And that is not identical with the body, right? Um, let's talk about Plato a little bit more just to set the stage, because I actually got a very interesting comment on the last video. um, I don't think it was from one of my students, but I certainly welcome the comments and I will respond to this comment. But the comment asked me, like, why aren't we taking more of a Platonic approach or more of a Hegelian approach? Well, it's really due to the way that Kim has written the book, right? I'm following what Kim is doing here. But why don't we look at a little bit more? Why don't we look a little bit more into what Plato made of the soul right now? So I've got Plato and Aristotle here. Who wants to tell me where this image comes from and also who's who in this depiction? Does anybody know? Lee, go ahead.
I think this is a mural in the Vatican.
I
I think I can't remember. Probably wrong about that. I just have a memory of being in the Vatican because I went to the Vatican at one point and seeing this, but I don't know if I'm just making that up.
Very cool. I believe you're correct about the location.
Yeah.
It is a work of art by Raphael. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
Kaya has identified it as the School of Athens. That's correct. So yeah, you're both right on the money there. And Samuel looked at it in an art history course. Yeah, this is a very important, very well-known piece of work from that time. So who's who? By the way, this is just a little snippet from the School of Athens depicts all kinds of philosophers. But yeah, Plato is on the left and Aristotle is on the right. How do we know? Well, there are a couple of giveaways. Aristotle was Plato's most famous student. And we can see here that this fellow is depicted as being younger than this fellow. So that would lead us to conclude that Plato is this fellow on the left. Another thing, I don't know if you can read this, but this says Timeo, which is one of Plato's dialogues, the Timaeus. You can't see the book Aristotle is holding here, but it is, you can't see the title, that is, but in the full image you can. This is the Nicomachean Ethics, which is very famously written by Aristotle. And finally, as far as the symbolism is concerned, Plato is pointing up. Plato the idealist. Well, the terminology is a bit funny here. Sometimes we call Plato an idealist because he believes that there are these ideal or intelligible forms, and those are the most real things. So the soul itself actually gets its existence from the form of life, and the body is corrupt and corporeal and perishable, but the soul gets its reality from participating in this form of life. And that's why it's immortal and divine and imperishable, because the forms are like the most real thing. And there's forms for everything, for the beautiful, for the good, for the true, for justice. There's forms for maybe what we think of as more mundane sorts of things like cups, tables, chairs, etc. So sometimes Plato's characterized as a as an idealist because he believes in these idealized intelligible forms that we can't know directly via the senses or indirectly via the senses for that matter. We grasp the nature of the forms with the intellect. But sometimes he's also called a realist. Like Platonic realism means that the forms are the most real thing. Again, so the terminology can be a bit weird there. One way or another, Plato is what we call a rationalist, like Descartes, who we're going to look at in a moment. So Plato is a rationalist because he believes that knowledge comes from the intellect. Aristotle, on the other hand, much more of an empiricist. Plato's concerned with those perfect divine forms. Aristotle's concerned with what's here in the world. Aristotle was very much not just what we would think of as a philosopher, but also a scientist, right? Aristotle, not that he relied on experimentation or anything like scientists do today, but he did rely a lot on observation, on sense experience, right? Well, for Plato, the soul, the body is like a house for the soul. In the chariot analogy, right? In one of Plato's dialogues, he has this analogy where the various parts of soul are operating this chariot. The rational part of the soul is the driver of the chariot. And then we have the appetitive soul and the spirited soul, which are like two horses. And they're flying horses, by the way. They're like winged horses. The appetitive soul wants to go down, the spirited soul wants to go up, and the job of the rational soul is to kind of keep them in line. And I guess on this analogy, the body might be the chariot. So the body isn't a phenomenon of the soul. The body is a temporary sort of place where the soul dwells, right? This is not so for Aristotle. For Aristotle, the form is, where Plato thought that the forms were the most real thing. And matter, what we would call matter, is just, this is kind of earthly, corruptible. It decays, it breaks down. It's not as important. The forms are what are really real. The forms are Plato's ultimate reality. Aristotle said, well, without form, matter is just matter. But without matter, a form is just nothing. It's just an idea you have. So for Aristotle, matter and form are kind of equally important. And for Aristotle, the soul is the form of a living body. What does form mean? Form, um, from morphe, uh, is like the shape. You can think of it as a shape. Or if you're going to use the term idea, like form and idea refer to the same thing. The idea or eidos is that which is seen, not by the eyes, by the intellect, right? So an idea, a form, you could liken it to maybe how you might be used to thinking of concepts as somewhat form-like. For Plato, there's a form for everything, right? So there's this cup that I have my coffee in right here. That's one particular cup, and it's made of matter. In the cupboard over there, there are many more cups like this, made of matter, more or less the same general shape, right? They contain, they can hold liquids, right? They have volume, they have little handles on them, they have maybe some nice designs. But these all get their cupness from the form of the cup, which is a perfect form, and it exists beyond our reality. So that's what a form is for Plato. Does that make sense? Excellent. You know, if you really want to do a deep dive into Plato on the soul, I highly recommend you check out uh, the Phaedo, which is the dialogue that sort of recounts the last hours of Socrates' life. Socrates was Plato's teacher, and he was, of course, sentenced to death by a jury of his fellow Athenians for corrupting the youth and for impiety. So basically, not believing in the city gods, disrespecting the gods of the city. So he was found guilty of corrupting the youth. He was to die by drinking hemlock. And to sort of alleviate the worries of his friends who were there with him on that last day, he gives these four arguments for the immortality of the soul. And you can really get a nice idea of what Plato thinks of the soul from reading that dialogue. But um, I think Plato has a lot in common with conceptions of the soul that we have in Abrahamic religions, particularly Christianity. And that's probably because a number of early Christian thinkers were also Neoplatonists, right? They knew Plato's work. So Saint Augustine, for example, right? As you get toward the Middle Ages, it gets a lot more Aristotelian, right? Like Thomas Aquinas and stuff. Um, But Plato's ideas of the soul have actually informed some of the ways we look at the soul in religions like Christianity. Likewise has Aristotle. Yeah, basically, Push. Yeah, that's correct. So one horse represents Eros and one represents Thumos. So that's desire and passion. Um, you can think about it like this. You know, if you want to forget the charity analogy, just think of it like just think of yourself like you have desires, basic drives and desires like hunger, thirst, um, and you have emotions or what philosophers used to call passions. And sometimes you need to use your reason to keep those in check, right? You're hungry, sure, then eat. You're thirsty, sure, then drink. But sometimes you get the urge to overindulge, right? You want to eat too much or you eat too much bad food. Well, reason has to sort of tamp that down. Um, Likewise with your emotions. You know, your emotions are there to do a job. Sometimes, in fact, most of the time, the emotions, what they do is they represent to you what's important, whether things that are, what things are happening around you, how are those things important to your organism, and in what way are they important? Like fear could indicate that there's a danger, for example. If you see a big bear charging at you and you feel frightened, that's your body's way of letting you know you need to get the heck out of there because there's a bear, right? But sometimes you can be frightened when there's no need to be, right? Like if you have an irrational fear. And then reason should say, look, I know you're afraid of that cute little puppy over there, but it's not a big charging bear. It's not going to eat you. There's no need to be afraid of the puppy, right? That's kind of how Plato sees the rational soul governing the spirited soul and appetitive soul. Could it be partially inspired by Phobos and Deimos? I'm not sure because Phobos and Deimos are each types of fear, are they not? Um, yeah, fear and panic, dread and terror. Yeah. I'm not sure, although Plato absolutely would have been familiar with these figures. Um, Yeah, so Jerry, when it comes to the forms themselves are immaterial, but everything material is kind of fashioned in the image of the forms. Yeah, the mind or the rational soul, or the word for soul in Greek is psyche. It's the word of our word for psychology. And yeah, the mind, in the sense of the rational soul, is the driver of the chariot. Yeah. No, Samuel, that's fine. It's good to it's good to think about connections between different things. Then again, I'm not a classicist, so I don't know beyond what I'm telling you now. I don't know, right? So yeah, the soul is perfect, divine, imperishable. The body is corrupt. Bodies die, souls do not, according to Plato. So you are a soul. And the soul is what we would think of as the mind today. And for most of the history of philosophy, that's how it was. And you see that in Descartes. Like if you read through the meditations, he talks about the soul, not the mind. But he means what we would call the mind today. Um, Lee, go ahead.
Yeah, so the appetitive soul is the desires, and then the spiritive soul is the emotions. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Okay.
basically right. Yeah. So,
Okay.
I mean, for a long time, philosophers called them passions, not emotions. And passion comes from pathos, which means to suffer, right? But that's basically the idea. Anyway, we call all of this mind-body dualism, and it seems to come naturally to a lot of people as a folk notion as well. By that I mean it's like an everyday, a very intuitive, everyday sort of way of understanding the world, right? Remember last time we talked about how as human beings, we are able to very easily, although not all of the time, but most of the time, we're able to easily categorize the animate and the inanimate. And out of the things that are animate, we're able to easily categorize the kinds of things that have minds versus the kinds of things that don't have minds. And there are probably, some pretty good evolutionary reasons for this. But along with that comes this idea that there are bodies and there are minds, and they're two different sorts of things, right? And that's what I mean by calling this a folk notion. It comes naturally to us, um, although it can confuse us when it comes to understanding the nature of the mental. This is a big theme in well, not just Gilbert Ryle's work, but also in, take a thinker like Daniel Dennett. It's a huge theme in his work too. Okay. I'll try my best. So who's familiar with the allegory of the cave from Plato? Lee is. Anyone else? Hayden is. Leo is. Samuel's not. Kaya knows it. Rossum, Josh, Yosef, Lily. Okay, so a lot of you have heard of it. Holly doesn't know. Well, I'll tell you. Don't worry about it. Okay, so in the Republic, we have the character Socrates, and he's talking to the character Glaucon or Glaucus, Plato's brother. And they're talking about the nature of knowledge, the nature of education. And Socrates has Glaucon and the reader imagine a cave where there is we're all sort of stuck in the cave and there are prisoners there. They're fettered or chained. There's a way up out of the cave, but these people are chained up in there. Behind them is a fire that's burning and providing a source of light. Between the fire and the prisoners, who are staring at the wall, there's a sort of rampart, and there are people carrying objects across that rampart. The light from the fire shines on those objects, and those objects cast shadows onto the wall of the cave. Now, the prisoners in the cave think that those shadows are the things themselves, the real things, the forms. But they're not. They're mere shadows, mere appearances. One of the prisoners gets free one day, and he sees the truth of the situation. He sees that, well, the real objects are over there, casting a shadow on the wall. And what I thought was reality was mere appearance. And then eventually he goes up out of the cave and he sees the sun, and the sun is like the form of the good, which just illuminates everything. And then, of course, he goes back down into the cave to try and tell people that what they believe is real is not real. And they think he's crazy. Um, but the fire shining the light, the real objects casting the shadows, those are the forms. And the shadows on the wall that the prisoners think are real, are mere appearance. Does that help clear it up? I haven't read The Room. It's not anything to do with the movie, is it? You know, The Room. You're tearing me apart, Lisa. Please tell me you've seen it. Okay, Josh, I'm glad that helps. I guess Plato would tell you this cup is not like a real cup. It's a mere shadow of a cup. The real cup is this perfect form of a cup. Okay, yeah, send me a link. I kind of figured because that movie is very weird. Um, pretty great if you want to laugh though. Oh, Room. Oh, like where there was a movie called Room with Brie Larson, right? And she's trapped in this room
Yeah.
with her child and her partner is like keeping her imprisoned or something.
Yeah, and the little boy, he's never been out of the room. The author's really good at depicting his thoughts about what reality is, and his
Mm.
whole universe is that room. And eventually, when he leaves the room, he only has that frame of work to understand
Yes.
it. It's really interesting because it's just his thoughts.
That's very good, you know. There are a couple of other movies that I recommend if you want to understand Plato's if you want to really, see some good applications of the cave allegory. One of those is, of course, The Matrix, and the other is The Truman Show. There are probably other examples, but those are the ones that my students seem to be most familiar with, right? Um, okay, so if we're all clear on forms, then let's move on to Descartes. Um, Considering the forms probably won't be very important for the rest of the class, although I think it is good to be familiar with the idea. So I'm glad we had this little chat. Descartes, what does Descartes do? Why is Descartes important? Well, he's the guy who formulated substance dualism or mind-body dualism in the version that we know it today. Um, yeah, good, Liam. Yeah. I think that was we can see how Plato falls under that rationalist umbrella. Rationalists like Plato, like Descartes, believe that knowledge comes from the exercise of the intellect, not the senses. The senses mislead us, so we better not use the senses as our primary source for knowledge, right? You can really see that in the cave allegory. So Descartes is responsible for the version of substance dualism that probably most of us will be familiar with. Yeah, I think I had a student write a paper on that. Um, Actually, I wonder if that was you, Rossum. Um, but I have had students write on that. Yeah, okay, I knew it. Wonderful. Welcome back. Um, okay, so Descartes um, is not only the instantiator of substance dualism, the version of mind-body dualism that Kim is concerned with in this book. He's also known as the father of modern philosophy because um, he sort of lit the spark of philosophy in the modern era. That is starting around the 16th century, 17th century, right? So prior to this, philosophy had been a whole lot of like scholastic philosophy, a lot of metaphysics, a lot of theology, right? Descartes gets a lot more scientific with it. In fact, Descartes is an important figure in the scientific revolution, and he's also the originator of rationalism in the early modern tradition. So again, rationalism is an epistemology. It's a theory of knowledge. where knowledge, the primary source of knowledge is the use of your reason. Descartes called reason the natural light. Where scholastic philosophers had previously called reason the divine light, Descartes called it the natural light because reason illuminates the world. Again, think of the role of the sun in the allegory of the cave, right? That's the form of the good, but that's what illuminates everything for us. For Descartes, that is reason. Um, a few interesting facts about his life. He was born in France, but he actually spent a lot of his working life in the Netherlands because he was afforded greater freedom to work there. You don't see this in the copy of the meditations that I shared with you, but in the book copy that I have from Penguin that I had when I was an undergraduate, he opens it up with a letter of dedication to the Sorbonne, to the theology faculty at the Sorbonne, basically trying to ensure that he's not meaning to step on any toes, right? Because at certain points in the meditation, um, he does raise the possibility that God either does not exist or God is a deceiver. He doesn't argue that this is the case, but merely thinking about this could be enough to get you in trouble. So he writes this big long letter, hey, I'm definitely not a heretic or an atheist. I'm just doing philosophy. We're cool, right? A lot of his books ended up being banned by the Catholic Church, but at least in the Netherlands, he had the freedom to work on this stuff, right? But it's not as if he was an atheist or anything, right? He was actually educated at a Jesuit college. So Jesuit, that's the Society of Jesus Christ. You can think of them as like Catholic philosopher priests, right? They do lots of different stuff like studying, meditating, praying, missionary work, charity work. Yeah, I believe. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know my popes. But I do believe France, was that the previous one before we got the new guy, America Pope guy? The one before was Francis? Yeah, he was a Jesuit. I can't remember his name, but I know he was a Jesuit merely because of this this stuff right here that I have to teach, right?
Yeah, it was
Um,
Pope Francis and then Pope Leo, I think.
all right, Leo,
Yeah.
yeah, from Chicago. It still looks like it's so weird, an American Pope. It seems like America's too new. I don't know. But then again, Francis was from Argentina, so yeah, I don't know. Um, he was educated as a Jesuit college. This was when he was younger, by the way. People went if you were going to go to college or university back then, you went a lot younger than you did today. And that's just because of how education worked. So at university, he studied law. He had a very big interest in natural philosophy, or what we would call science, natural science today. Back then, there really wasn't a distinction between science and philosophy. Philosophy was just kind of everything that wasn't theology, and there were philosophers who were interested in the natural world, and they were called natural philosophers. He was also very interested in mathematics. He did not live a very long life, though. He died in 1650 at the rather young age of 53. He was serving as Queen Christina's philosophy tutor. Queen Christina, Queen of Sweden, liked to get up very early for her lectures. And of course, it can get cold in Sweden in certain times of year. I mean, we know this because we live in a similar climate here in Canada. So imagine, you're in some drafty old stone castle trudging up the stairs before the sun rises every day to give the queen a lesson in philosophy. You might catch something like pneumonia, and that seems to be what happened to Descartes. So he passed away quite young. He also had some pretty interesting debates with a lot of his students. One of those students, we'll look at what they had to say today, and that was Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, who offers some very interesting criticisms of Descartes' substance dualism. So I'm really looking forward to that part of the lecture where we look at what Princess Elizabeth had to say to Descartes. Now, Kim describes Descartes' substance dualism as an interactionist substance dualism. Let's break down what that means. First, substance. What is a substance? Well, it is something in which properties inhere. That is one way to understand it. So again, take this cup. Um, it's got a number of properties. It's solid. It's hollow. It has a handle. It's made of material that helps it keep my coffee warm. What other properties does this have? Well, it has certain colors. It's sort of a turquoise color on the inside here. It's got some nice flowers on it and butterflies. Oh, it even has the property of having an inspirational quote. It says, "You're amazing. Thanks, coffee cup." So these are all properties that the coffee cup has. Those properties could not exist on their own. They inhere within this substance. You could have a cup without the properties. You could have the matter without the properties. You can't have the properties without the thing it's made of, without the substance that it's made out of. This cup can also exist independently, right? That's another thing that makes it a substance. So that's what we mean by substance in this context, right? When it comes to, this is a big one, existing independently. This flower right here, or this quote, "You're amazing." What else does it say? "You make the world a better place just by being in it." Aw, this is my mother-in-law's coffee cup. It's not mine, so, but that's nice. This little thing that's printed here couldn't exist without this cup, but the cup could exist without it, right? Same with the colors, right? It's green on the inside. Uh, Green doesn't exist independently. Green, you need a green object. You need an object to bear the property, right? So that's what we mean by independent existence and properties inhering within substances. Well, yeah, that's a good question. Well, remember last time I mentioned John Locke, who said, like, look, properties adhere to or inhere within substance, and if we take everything away, then we're left with substance. But what is substance? We know not what. Substance is just whatever it is that all the properties inhere within. If you're used to thinking of just a lump of matter, you can still see that it has certain properties. We'll get to this with the wax exercise if well, let's do it now. Let's talk about the wax exercise now. Kim doesn't really talk about it, but did any of you get to the wax exercise in the second meditation? Okay. So what's going on there? Really, for Descartes, it's a sort of conceptual demonstration of rationalism. Like he has this piece of beeswax, and he's like, "Look, it's hard, and I can knock on it. It has a certain smell, it has a certain weight and a certain shape. But he could put it near the fire, and when he puts it near the fire, it melts. The smell changes. It's no longer solid; it's liquid. If he were to boil the wax, it would increase in volume even further. So the properties change. It goes from being solid to liquid. It goes from being fragrant to not smelling very nice at all. But Descartes knows that it is still the wax because that's something he can grasp with the intellect, even though the senses make it seem like the solid wax is completely different substance than the melted wax. But what is the substance? Locke would say, we know not what. It's just whatever all the properties in here with him, right? Yeah, the properties of the wax change, and it's still wax. And he knows this. He's claiming he knows this because he grasps it with his intellect. So that's the demonstration of rationalism. But for our purposes, we know that the wax is a substance. It is an extended substance, and its properties might change. But because it's an extended substance, one thing that's not going to change is the fact that it is extended. Um, the properties well, I don't want to say, Liam, that the properties don't matter, but the properties are what allow us to individuate different things, right? Because substance is kind of like, well, what is that? Substance is somewhat mysterious. I want to go back. Yeah, could you have a cup without any? Well, you could have matter without any of that. You could have extended substance without any of that. Um, like Kim says in the chapter, you could have like a lump of bronze, and depending on its properties, it could be any number of things. It could be a bust of Beethoven, a bust of Brahms, or you could melt it down and turn it into a doorstop, right? Um, that's changing its properties. Um, no, not yeah. So not in respect to something being a substance. Substance is kind of everything is some kind of substance. But it's the properties of those substances that individuate them as different objects. Um, Lee?
So properties. So substance is just like the place at which properties intersect.
I would
I
say,
don't know if that makes sense.
if I can put it in this extremely non-technical way, substance is whatever stuff has properties.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And
All right.
importantly, substances exist independently, properties do not. So,
Right, right,
right,
right.
this particular instantiation of the property green, it needs this cup to
Yeah.
exist. If there were no cup, there would be no instantiation of this color green.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, there are a lot of different ways to answer this, Samantha. Plato would say there's a form of green, for example, but Aristotle would say green is a universal, and the green in my coffee cup is just a particular example of green, right? Um, so yeah, it kind of depends on which thinker we're looking at. Yeah, the substance is maybe like a blank canvas of some kind, as Paul says. The properties turn it into a picture. That's one way of looking at it. Yeah. Um, Holly, that's not bad. Primary and secondary qualities, that's Locke. Um, and what those are we have ideas of primary qualities and ideas of secondary qualities. Our ideas of primary qualities resemble the primary qualities themselves. So solidity would be a primary quality. And our mental representation of solidity resembles solidity. But secondary qualities don't resemble. Our ideas of secondary qualities don't resemble those qualities. So yellow, lemons are yellow. But what is a real lemon? Well, I guess the surface of the lemon absorbs every color except yellow, and reflects yellow to us. So what color is the lemon? Maybe it's every color except yellow, right? Or maybe you're a dog and you are somewhat colorblind. Maybe you can't see yellow. Maybe it's gray or something, right? So that's John Locke. But those primary and secondary qualities, the qualities themselves are properties, and then we have our ideas of those properties, which are mental representations of those properties. Um, So, substance. Wow, we're doing a lot of metaphysics today, everyone. Um, so for Descartes, the mind or the soul is one kind of substance. Res cogitans, thinking substance. I am a sum res cogitans. I am a thinking thing. That's what I am. And bodies are res extensa. They're extended substances. Now, body doesn't just mean my body or your body. Body means object. This is a body. Um, the scented candle is a body. What else do I have? Lots of bodies around here. Oh, here we go. Ah, a chair. This is a body. What else? Oh, there's my dog on the couch. Uh, that's a body. The couch is a body, right? All of these objects are bodies. They're all extended substance. So that's what we mean by substance, right? Exists independently, properties in here within substance. And there are two kinds of those substances for Descartes: thinking substance and extended substance. Um, Thinking substance is not extended in space, thinking substance is immaterial, and thinking substance thinks. Thinking substance is what enables everything mental. So, thinking, perceiving, willing, imagining, anything you can think of, feeling pain, feeling hunger, feeling some kind of desire, having a belief, all of that stuff that we went over last time, um, that are characteristic of mental things. For Descartes, all of that is what thinking substance does. An extended substance is different. It doesn't think, and it is extended. So it has dimensions. It takes up space. It has characteristics like maybe like solidity or quantity, right? Kim uses the word bulk, right? Extended substance has a bulk. I'd rather say thinking substance, and Descartes wouldn't have put it this way, but extended substance has mass, right? And it takes up space. That is one way Descartes would have put it. Now, it's interactionist substance dualism because these two substances are somehow supposed to interact with one another, right? So there are motions in the external world. The external world, remember, this is a very materialist time. Even though Descartes is arguing for the existence of an immaterial mind or an immaterial soul, he is still very much a materialist because he looks at the world in terms of matter in motion. And so there's matter in the external world moving around, doing stuff, and it affects the senses, the eyes, the ears, and so on. Now, these motions in our sense organs, they affect our nerves and our muscles via the animal spirits. Animal spirits, Descartes imagined, were a sort of fluid. You can imagine if the nervous system and the muscles were almost like some kind of hydraulic system. Of course, we know it doesn't work this way now. But Descartes imagined that, it was something like a fluidic sort of thing that pushed and pulled in the body, all the muscles and nerves. These could be affected by things in the external world. That would affect the animal spirits, would eventually go to the pineal gland in the center of the brain, which is where Descartes thought the locus of interaction occurred. So there are sort of these mechanical processes that happen, starting with the world, affecting our senses, affecting our nervous system, affecting the brain, affecting the pineal gland, which caused us to have, maybe perceptions in the soul, appearances before the soul. And likewise, the soul thinks, desires, forms volitions, etc. So the soul somehow affects the pineal gland, which affects the animal spirits, which affects the muscles, which causes me to I don't know, raise my hand or take a sip of coffee. So it's a sort of bi-directional um, interactionist system where physical events can cause mental events and mental events can also cause physical events. That is why it is interactionist in nature. That is why Kim describes it that way. All right, so here are some central tenets of substance dualism. Now, it's important to note that this is not exactly how Descartes puts it. This is a sort of reading and interpretation that Kim offers us. But here are the core tenets. There are, firstly, substances of two fundamentally different kinds in the world: mental substance and material substances, or minds and bodies. The essential nature of a mind is to think, be conscious, and engage in other mental activities. The essence of a body is to have spatial extensions, a bulk, and be located in space. So, two different kinds of substances right there. Number two, a human person is a composite being, a union, as Descartes called it, of a mind and body. Okay? So there's the dualism. Three, minds are diverse from bodies. No mind is identical with a body. We can see this when, I think, in the second meditation, um, Descartes identifies himself with his mind or with his soul, not with his body. And finally, minds and bodies causally influence each other. Some mental phenomena are causes of physical phenomena and vice versa. That's the interactionist part. Now, the big problem for Kim with substance dualism, and indeed, the big problem of substance dualism for a lot of other philosophers nowadays is how we can have one, two, and three and have these three together working with four. Four is the problem that they can that material phenomena can affect mental phenomena, or that mental phenomena can affect material phenomena. That's the problem. And that's what we're going to be concerned with here. So, what is Descartes doing in these meditations? Well, he's, at least in the first two, he's trying to work out what he can know with certainty. So, yeah, I'd say the first two are, it's not that they're not metaphysical at all, but Descartes is doing a lot of epistemology here, too. He's trying to work out what he can know with certainty. And he uses radical doubt or methodological doubt to do that, right? He doubts everything. He doubts knowledge from his senses, right? This is we won't go into this in very great detail, but this is known as the dream argument, right? Sure, your senses can deceive you. That's not the reason why we don't trust them. We don't trust the senses because in dreams, uh, you know, we often experience things. Our senses mislead us such that we believe we're, I don't know, awake, sitting by the fire doing philosophy when really we're asleep in bed, right? And what that shows Descartes is that it's not that the senses can sometimes deceive us. That's not why we ought not to trust them. It's that we have no way of being certain that the senses are even representing the world the way it is at all. That's the dream argument. So that's what he does with knowledge from the senses. Then, so that's also what we call a posteriori knowledge. Um, Descartes then goes on to doubt a priori knowledge, knowledge you can have independent of sense experience. And he does that with his demon argument, right? He could be being deceived by a supremely powerful and malevolent demon who can convince him of all kinds of things, like, um, triangles actually have four sides. An evil genius or a demon could make Descartes believe that, right? He could make Descartes believe that 2 plus 2 equals 5, right? So it's not just knowledge from the senses, it's also a priori knowledge we have to doubt. And then toward, I think toward the end of the second meditation, he says, this is coming off of the demon argument. But there is a supremely powerful and cunning deceiver who deliberately deceives me all the time. Even then, if he is deceiving me, I undoubtedly exist. Let him deceive me all he can. He will never bring it about that I am nothing while I think I am something. So, after thoroughly thinking the matter through, I conclude that this proposition, I am, I exist, must be true whenever I assert it or think it. And this is the epistemological foundation that Descartes was looking for. He cannot, he can doubt everything except that he exists. So there's one thing he can know for certain. And now he can build all of his knowledge back up on that foundation. And that's where this comes from, the cogito. This is in Latin, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Or in French, je pense donc je suis, right? Which is how you'd get it in the discourses. The discourses were published in French originally, the meditations originally in Latin, if I'm not mistaken. So that's why there are two different versions. So that's what he can know for certain. And that also establishes for Descartes what he is, essentially. Essentially, he is not his body, he is his mind. He is a thinking thing. Lee, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think you already explained this maybe even in last class, but I forgot what epistemology is. What's epistemology? What does that
Ah,
mean? It's a
yes.
big word.
So epistemology means something like theory of knowledge or study of knowledge. It comes from the Greek episteme, which means understanding. So whenever we're doing epistemology, we're dealing with knowledge, the nature of knowledge, what it is, how do we obtain it, how do we know when we've obtained it. That's epistemology, right? Good question, Samantha. Is there a philosophy of the mind cheat sheet with all the Latin phrases for concepts? There must be somewhere out there. I don't have one, but a really great way of studying and making sure that you digest the material is if you put your own cheat sheet together. I used to do that when studying for tests and things like that when I was an undergraduate. I would try and write down all of the key terms, concepts, and thinkers that I could remember off the top of my head. And then once I'd done that, I would look over my notes and my textbooks and my readings, and I'd fill in everything I had missed. And then I would study that. I would study that sheet, a kind of master reference sheet. And that worked really well for me. Um, I think it would work well for all of you. So if you want to, you can even collaborate on it through the Discord server. Get like a big shared Google Doc and like, okay, cogito ergo sum. That means I think, therefore I am. Res cogitans, a thinking thing or a thinking substance. Res extensa, that's an extended substance, right? Um, yeah, like collaborate. If you guys wanted to collaborate on that, that would be a super good idea. It kind of like your own little Wikipedia page for this course. That would be the idea, right? Um, so Descartes is a thinking thing. He is not his body. He's not identical with his body. He's not identical with his brain. The brain, incidentally, is not what does the thinking. The mind is what does the thinking. And that's Descartes. Now, I'm glad you brought up epistemology, Lee, because we're actually getting right on with some epistemological arguments. Um, Boy, the time is flying. We've already been at this for an hour. Isn't it crazy how fast time goes when you're doing philosophy? It's crazy. So, as we were reminded in answering Lee's question there about epistemology, it's always got to do with knowledge, right? So these are epistemic or epistemological arguments because they deal with knowledge, and we'll see this as we go through them. So let's try and go through as many of these arguments as we can before we take our break. This is argument one, and this is again following Kim. If you want to read this in the textbook, it's on page 36. These arguments, this is what arguments in philosophy often look like, by the way. Like, what is an argument? Actually, let's talk about that. What is an argument? I meant to talk about this. You're going to want to know what an argument is because, well, in your essay and maybe even in some of your critical reflection pieces, you might want to do a little bit of argumentation or critique some arguments. What is an argument? What is an argument? It's not a fight you have, right? Like, like in the sort of everyday vernacular way where we say, "Oh, I got into an argument with so and so." What were you arguing about? Oh, well, I asked so and so to come by and check on my dog, and they forgot, and I got mad at them, and we had a fight, right? That's what we mean in the everyday sort of sense. Um, Yeah, Yosef, like a claim, like a premise, elaborate on it, reach a conclusion. Yeah, basically. Conclusion that follows logically from the premises. Yeah. Premise and falsification. Well, falsification, that's more to do with science. Um, a pirate's lament. I don't, I'm not sure if I get that, but um, uh, so yeah, an argument is a means of convincing somebody. Oh, I get it. I get it. I get it now, now that it's been explained. Hey, what's a pirate's favorite letter? You'd think it was R, but his first love was the C. Thanks, everyone. I'm here all week. Yeah, yeah, Samuel and Samantha got it. So, yeah, an argument is a means of convincing somebody of something, right? And in philosophy, arguments often have this form where we have a number of premises and and maybe one or more conclusions. In this first argument, we actually have two conclusions. Um, the premises contain information. They contain the content, right? They have content, kind of like how mental states have content. Now, here's what we want. Um, we want our arguments to be valid and sound. What does it mean for an argument to be valid? Well, in a deductive argument like this one, for an argument to be valid, the conclusion must logically follow from the premises. That is, the premises must logically entail the conclusion. That means that we have to follow the rules of proper reasoning. If we follow the rules of proper reasoning, we don't commit any formal or informal fallacies, then the conclusion should follow from the premises. We also want the argument to be sound, which we want the premises to be true. And if the premises are true, so if the argument is sound and the argument is logically valid, the conclusion is guaranteed to be true. And for that reason, we say that deductive arguments are truth preserving. Nice. Nice. I do love a good dad joke, so that won't be the last of them. Um, so let's take a look at this argument. Now, remember, this is an epistemological argument, so it deals with knowledge, and you can see how it deals with knowledge here. And again, just to reiterate, this is not how Descartes puts it. This is kind of like what Kim is doing is drawing out these particular formulations that are more or less compatible with what Descartes wrote. That's why Kim says it's better to think of all of this as Cartesian rather than Descartes' actual arguments. So, like argument one here, this is all Jaguan Kim, but it's Cartesian in that it kind of nicely meshes with Descartes and what he thought and what he argued. Premise one, I am such that my existence cannot be doubted. And okay, so remember, the I, the ego, for Descartes is the mind, not the body. Premise two, my body is not such that its existence cannot be doubted. So, what Descartes is saying here, I cannot doubt my existence. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Whenever I think it or assert it, it is necessarily true. Because even if my senses are deceiving me, even if some evil genius is deceiving me about the nature of reality and the nature of not just a posteriori knowledge, but a priori knowledge, he can deceive me all he wants. He can never convince me that I do not exist because there has to be somebody who exists who's being deceived, right? So I think, therefore I am. So Descartes is not, Descartes' existence cannot be doubted. But his body is, the nature of his body is not the same, right? He could doubt the existence of his body. Have you ever doubted the existence of your body? Have you ever wondered, what if it's all a dream? What if it's all a simulation? What if I am actually a brain sitting in a vat of nutrients, like Hillary Putnam has us imagine? And, I'm just a brain sitting there, but I'm hooked up to some apparatus by some mad scientist. Um, and he's programming me in such a way that it seems to me like I have a body and I exist in a world, but really I'm just a brain in a vat. What if? Lee?
Um, there's a very cool philosophical sort of allegory relating to this, where basically, if you believe that at some point humanity is going to reach the point of being able to make a perfect simulation, then the chances of us being the first layer of that simulation are like zero. Because if they make a perfect simulation of all of humanity, then that layer is also going to make a simulation, and so it's like simulations all the way down. And maybe we are living in a simulation.
Maybe. I mean, and remember, the point of asking these questions, and thank you, that was very good. The point of asking these questions is not because it's a realistic possibility that we're in a simulation, right? This is more about what can we know, right? That's why we do this. There are a lot of weird internet people, like your Elon Musk types, who are like, oh, yeah, we totally might be living in a simulation, man. It's like, you're missing the point. That's not why we do this. We do this so that we know what we can be certain of, not to convince people on Twitter that we live in a simulation, right? Just want to get that out of the way, okay? Um, yeah, turtles, simulations, maybe it goes on forever, ad infinitum, right? Oh, wow. Yeah, I recently saw those. That's so it's kind of cruel when people record people recovering from anesthesia, but I did watch one recently where I think it was a family bringing it was the mom had just had surgery. Maybe it was dental, maybe it was something else. And anyway, her partner convinced her that uh, they had just picked up all their kids from the park like they weren't their kids. It's just like, oh no, you don't have kids. I just found all these guys. They're ours now. And it's like, oh no, we have to return them. Like, oh, it's so cruel. Um, so you get the idea, right? Even if you think, oh, I'm in a simulation, I'm still real, right? This body could be a hologram or a computer program or a dream or a hallucination, but I'm real, right? Yeah, it was making the rounds. I forget where I saw it, YouTube or something, but and I've never had anesthesia, but I can imagine that I would be quite confused when I wake up. Um, I should ask, actually, my sister-in-law is here. Well, they're not here now, but recently she broke her ankle. Doctor said it's the worst broken ankle he's ever seen. And so she had to have some plates put in. I'm going to have to ask her about her post-anesthesia experience. But these are the two premises. I am such that my existence cannot be doubted, and my body is not such that existence cannot be doubted. You can doubt the existence of your body, but you can't doubt the existence of you. Conclusion one. I am not identical with my body because I can doubt the existence of the body, but not the existence of myself. Therefore, the thinking thing that I am, that is my mind, is not identical with my body. What do you think? Do you buy this argument? And you know what? There's no right or wrong answers. Well, that's not true. I don't want you to feel afraid of speaking out, whether you do or do not accept it. I want us to go through this and analyze it together. Lee, what do you think?
I think that just because you can doubt that something is real doesn't mean that it's automatically fake.
Mhm.
Um, and also, like, it's kind of like that thing about how the joke about the philosopher who's like, "How do I know this sandwich exists?" But like, you're still gonna take a bite out of it, right?
Yeah,
So I don't know.
there's a Bishop George Berkeley w was a subjective idealist. So where Descartes is a dualist and he thinks there are extended substances and mental substances, Berkeley said there's only mental substance. So everything is idea. And we all kind of exist in the mind of God, as if it's like the Matrix, except it's not the Matrix, it's the mind of God. And God is the guarantor of all the stuff. Somebody famously retorted, I refute Berkeley thus, and kicked a rock. And it's like, okay, yeah, but that doesn't, I mean, I don't think Berkeley's right, but that doesn't refute Berkeley. Because that rock could just be another idea, right? Um, right? Hayden.
I don't exactly know if this is like doing philosophy right, but that really seems like incompatible with embodied cognition, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
you're
all I guess.
absolutely right. Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist, wrote a book called Descartes' Error, which touches on a lot of this. And his book has got a lot to do with embodiment, right? Descartes, um, maybe this is because of the influence of his religious background, which again, some of that is influenced by Plato. But he's looking at the mind and body as two very different kinds of things. And nowadays, we don't really do that, at least not in philosophy. Many of us have lots of folk notions about dualism that we're quite comfortable with. But a big thing in philosophy now is 4E cognition, right? Cognition is embodied, embedded, extended, and enacted. We're not just brains in vats, right? We are embodied beings embedded in a dynamic and physical environment. Okay. Would it not be possible to doubt the mind, like briefly separating that you are what you are and your mind? Could you not make the argument that the exact manner of thinking you are performing is not your true self? For example, if some kind of alien had captured me and put inhibitors in my mind that limited its functionality while making it appear as if I was thinking normally, no, that is not nonsense. You see, and this is one of the what this is one of the issues, right? Like whether you buy this argument really kind of depends on whether you accept. Um, it's almost like it's almost question begging in a way, right? Because the mind body distinction is baked into this argument, but that's what we're trying to establish. This argument in particular, it doesn't beg the question, but the idea is like, well, my mind is just not the kind of thing that an alien or a mad scientist could affect in that way because it's non-physical. But not everyone has to accept that, right? You could say, no, a mad scientist or a super intelligent alien could put chips in my brain and make me think that I'm someone else, right? So whether you buy this argument, it's up to you. You might say, well, I reject the first premise. I reject the universal premise. I am such that my existence can be doubted. That's true. That's a good counterpoint, Paul. You still know that you exist. Nietzsche or David Hume or the Buddha would say you absolutely can doubt your existence because selves don't exist. Selves are not what you think they are, right? We think each of us as a self is this sort of unified, continuously existing, independently existing thing. But there are a lot of people, other people too, Thomas Metzinger, David Parfit, they would say, no, that's an illusion. That's how it seems to you, but that's not really what you are. That's not what a you or a self is, right? Yeah. Yeah. So Paul is right in that you can have false beliefs about yourself but still know that you exist, right? You might have, like, think about this really happens, right? Somebody might, um, I've been rewatching King of the Hill. This is such a silly example. I've been rewatching that show, King of the Hill, because there's a new season coming out after all these years, and I want to check the new season out. But you know Hank Hill from King of the Hill, right? He lives in Texas. He sells propane and propane accessories. Yeah, it's a great show. I love it. I grew up with it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the new season is like. I rewatched the episode where uh, Hank is trying to get one of those native Texan license plates, which you can only get if you were born in Texas. And Hank believes he was born in Texas, but he finds out, spoiler alert, that he was actually, to his horror, born in New York, so he's not able to get a native Texan license plate. So here, Hank had a false belief about being born in Texas when he actually was not. He still is able to identify as a Texan because, all kinds of people came together at, the Alamo or something and fought for Texas, including people from New York. So he still thinks of himself as a Texan, and he's not broken up about not being able to get the license plate. But Hank Hill is not mistaken about the fact that he exists, right? But you could be mistaken about the fact that you exist as a unified, continuously existing self. And that's what the Buddhists would say. That's what Hume, Parfit, Metzinger, Nietzsche, that's what all of them would say. Um, yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's another, yeah, like Paul and Holly are discussing here. We're not exactly at the part where we're looking at the identity claim yet. But this will come in, this will come in handy later. Like we do need to think about the identity claim for a later argument. But we don't have to worry about it for this one. But for now, I'm such that my existence cannot be doubted. My body is not such that its existence cannot be doubted. We might be tempted to reject the first premise. And if you reject the universal premise, the first premise is called the universal premise, then it all falls apart. Um, okay. So, overall, would you say convinced or not convinced by the first argument? Good question, Yosef. In this context, we do not mean the brain. We mean the mind. The mind as the soul, if you like. Yeah, if not, where would the mind exist? We're going to get to that. Don't worry about that. Kim has a lot to say about that. Let's look at number two. Argument two. Premise one. My mind is transparent to me. That is, nothing can be in my mind without my knowing that it is there. My body is not transparent to me in the same way. Therefore, my mind is not identical with my body. What do we think? Well, it strikes me right off the bat, and Kim discusses this as well, that my mind is not transparent to me. Not to the extent that premise one makes it seem, right? Nothing can be in my mind without my knowing that it is there. I'm sorry. No. I flat out reject premise one. I'll give you all an example. How many of you right now at this moment are aware of your socks on your feet? You are now, but were you before? Yeah. You didn't feel them before, you weren't, but you were wearing them. Well, Lee's not wearing socks, but substitute the floor, right? Maybe the evil genius can make you believe you are not wearing socks when in fact you are. Yeah, that's right, Josh. Um, yeah, Descartes doesn't consider attention. And Descartes, that's right, Holly. And Descartes also has no idea about inhibition, right? The brain, we know now that the brain inhibits lots of signals so that you're not like consciously aware of everything at all time. But of course, Descartes completely unaware of that. Um, so yeah, I mean, if you're wearing socks, you're now aware that you're wearing socks. Um, were you not feeling your socks? I mean, you were wearing socks. That didn't change. It's just that now you've become aware of how they feel on your feet. You were always wearing socks, you just weren't always aware of it. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, Paul, that's actually called the cocktail party phenomenon. And it's illustrative of something called selective attention, right? Everything just kind of sounds like a noisy sort of din until you hear like, hey, Professor Redstone. And then you're, they're talking about me over there. And then you zero in on that, right? That's selective attention. Um, yeah, maybe Hayden. I'm not, I honestly, to be 100% upfront with you, I don't know where that 10% of your brain thing comes from. It could be because of that. It could be, um, oh yeah, yeah, maybe like Joshua says, it's like a misinterpreted article headline. Um, yeah, I really don't know what the story is there. Certainly, we use all of our brains all the time, but we're certainly not aware of most of what our brain is doing. But we do have to keep in mind that at this point, we're not actually talking about the brain. We're talking about the mind, right? Look at how many of us equivocate automatically between the mind and the brain because we are, I guess, in the same way that a lot of people have these folk notions about dualism, I think a lot of us also have a lot of physicalist folk notions about the mind-brain relation, right? Um, Samantha says, within Descartes' definition of the separate mind and body, the inhibited signals from your brain is not that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like maybe those motions just didn't affect the soul. Those animal spirits didn't make it to the pineal gland, right? Um, yeah, Paul, maybe that's it. Maybe we only knew what 10% of our brain did at the time, something like that. Yeah. This would be something we can dive into more on the Discord server. But oh, another thing, a lot of Freud gets a bit of a bad rap these days, but as I mentioned last time, one thing Freud was absolutely right about was that there's a heck of a lot going on in the unconscious that we are not consciously aware of. Um, Nowadays, the Freudian unconscious has kind of been replaced with the notion of a cognitive unconscious, right? Like, think about it. If you are fluent in English, or if you're a native speaker of English, try not understanding what I'm saying to you right now. You can't do it, can you? It's automatic. That's unconscious, right? And a lot of what the brain is doing there, we don't have conscious access to. So, sure, okay, my body is not transparent to me in the same way. Okay, yeah, I buy that. Sometimes I get a little paper cut and I don't notice it. Sometimes I'm wearing socks and I don't realize I can feel the socks until my philosophy professor reminds me that I'm wearing socks. Sure. But my mind is probably not transparent to me in this way. So this conclu if we reject premise one, then again, it kind of falls apart, right? Yes, yes. Yes, the unconscious part of the mind is absolutely part of the mind. Absolutely push. Um, it's 4 o'clock. Let's take a break. Yeah, that's a good point, Holly. Yeah. Sometimes I'll do that where I've got a lot going on and I think of something and then I forget and then I remember later, right? Well, Samantha, really, it's interchangeable here in this context. Soul, mind, it's interchangeable. Okay, so let's come back at 10 minutes after four. Um, we've got a lot more we need to get through. Um, so we'll just take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and we're going to do our best to finish everything off. Okay? I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, everybody. Let's get back to it. Excuse me. Yeah, James is a very, very important figure, not just in philosophy, but in psychology. A very, very important figure. Another person who I think is really cool, even though I disagree with some of what he says. Um, yeah, no, Descartes definitely didn't have the sort of concept of the unconscious that we have, I think. Yeah. Yeah, Freud was really one of the first people. I mean, in psychology anyway, but again, like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche were important antecedent figures to Freud, right? Um, it's very fascinating looking at the intellectual history of the idea of the unconscious. But I would say you kind of get inklings of it in Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. Freud is the first to really articulate it, um, and then kind of on from there, right? Let's look at the next epistemic argument. Each mind, premise one, each mind is such that there is a unique subject who has direct access to its contents. Okay. Premise two, no material body has a specially privileged knower. Knowledge of material things is in principle public and intersubjective. Therefore, minds are not identical with material bodies. Well, the second premise, sure, I agree. Objects in the world are publicly accessible, right? Anybody can look at this cup. But the contents of my mind are mine. They're not publicly accessible. Sure, I can speak, and I can tell you what I'm thinking about, but it's only I who have direct access to my mind. But I think similarly to similarly to the first argument or the previous argument, I think we're often mistaken about the level of access that we have to the contents of our own mind. We can have on beliefs that we're not conscious of. We can have desires that we're not conscious of. Um, there could be a lot in the mind um, that we don't really have direct access to at all times. And of course, also there are things that we forget. So something could have been in my mind at one point and now it's gone. I've forgotten it. So what do you think? Do you find this argument convincing, or are you, like me and Kim, a little bit skeptical of whether it succeeds? I mean, I think maybe I would alter the first premise. If I wanted this argument to work, I would say each mind is such that there is a unique subject who has access to its contents. Direct some of the time, other times maybe not so direct. Yeah, Hayden is skeptical as well. Fan of embodied cognition, that's fair. Um, Yeah, I can re-explain premise two. So no material body has a specially privileged knower. Like this cup, it does not have a specially privileged knower. In principle, anybody could know this cup because it's out there in the world, right? Knowledge of this cup is objective because it's an object out there in the world that everyone, in principle, anyway, could have access to. But that's not so with the contents of our minds. In principle, I'm the only one with direct access to its minds, to my mind. Therefore, minds are not identical with material bodies. Yeah, direct doesn't necessarily mean complete. That's a good point. Um, yeah, I'm sure, but that's yeah, that's an example of what premise two is saying. Like a doctor maybe knows more about a body than me, right? That's fine. Yeah. Because in principle, my body, it's not just bodies in the world, but our bodies are public, right? Like anyone could look and say, oh, there's Professor Redstone over there, you know? Yeah, that's right. You're reading that right, Holly. Yeah. Only I can truly observe the contents of my mind. Yeah, only I have like privileged access to the contents of my mind. There's a sort of mindness to what is in my mind, just as there is with what's in all of your minds. And the question is whether it follows from these two premises, whether minds are not identical with material bodies. Descartes is saying, sure, yeah, they're not. But we could debate that, right? We know more about the mind-body connection now than I think Descartes did. But like someone said in the chat earlier, um, we have tools available to us now that thinkers like Descartes or William James or any of those people did not have, right? Here's the problem, though, with epistemological arguments. They can be a little bit tricky. So it's hard to use epistemic properties to try and differentiate things. It's hard to appeal to the nature of knowledge to differentiate between two things. And for example, this is what Kim uses to illustrate this, right? He writes on page 38, to show that x does not equal y, it is necessary and sufficient to come up with a single property p such that x has p but y lacks it, or that y has p but x lacks it. Such a property p can be called the differential property for x and y. The question then is whether epistemic properties like being known with certainty or an intentional property like being believed to be such and such can be used as a differential property. That's the issue. Can epistemic properties differentiate? Um, so using scams, Liam says you can see others' emotions and what kinds of thought processes you are using. Yeah, that could be a way to challenge P1, but that is still indirect. It's indirect. Even if I scanned your brain, that's indirect, right? That's the kind of directness that Kim has in mind here. But there's a problem with these three arguments, right? The problem is whether epistemic properties can serve as differential properties. So here, we want to show that X is not the same as Y. Um, let me come up with an example here. We gotta get another coffee cup. That's what we need. Oh, here's one. Okay, this is X and this is Y. They're different. What differentiates them? Well, there are a lot of different properties that we could point to that differentiate them. The color, the shape, the material that these are made out of, all of these are differential properties. Okay? Now, the question is, are epistemic properties differential properties? Maybe not. The example Kim uses goes something like this. The driver of the black SUV is known to the police as the hit and run driver. So there was a driver in a black SUV who hit somebody and drove off. Okay, so he's known to the police as the hit and run driver. Now, Kim knows the driver of the black SUV as his neighbor, but Kim doesn't know that the driver of the black SUV is the hit and run driver, but they are in fact the same person. So in that example, the epistemic property being known, if you're the police, known as the hit and run driver, or Kim not known as the hit and run driver, it's not a differential property because in that example, Jaguan Kim's neighbor is the hit and run driver. See what I mean? It's the same individual, but those two properties don't differentiate the two. Or consider this. Um, this is an example that you see a lot in philosophy of language, but you'll see something like Lois Lane knows that Superman is Superman. And Lois Lane also knows that Clark Kent is Clark Kent. But Lois Lane does not know that Superman is Clark Kent. So different epistemic properties, same individual, right? So here, the epistemic properties don't differentiate the driver of the black SUV. They don't differentiate Superman and Clark Kent, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not to say that epistemic properties can't differentiate. It's just that there are concerns with using them to differentiate. And that's the tricky bit about using epistemic properties as differential properties. Everybody understand? Very good. Yeah, basically that's the concern, Holly. Like if we're going to use epistemic properties to try and distinguish between minds and bodies, um, then we worry that we might not be adequately distinguishing them or showing that they are distinct if we rely solely on epistemic properties because they don't always do that, right? And so the next set of arguments are actually metaphysical arguments, not epistemic. And they're metaphysical arguments because they deal with what sorts of things exist and what sort of what those things are like, right? Remember, metaphysics after the physics. Metaphysics deals with I've heard it described as the study of reality, right? So what exists? What is it like? I know that's a very Wikipedia sort of definition of metaphysics, but I think it's a good one. So here's argument four, the first of our metaphysical arguments. Premise one, my essential nature is to be a thinking thing. And we saw that in Descartes, right? If you read the Meditations or the first two, that is clear. According to Descartes, what he really is a thinking thing. I am a thing that thinks. His body's essential nature, according to premise two, is to be an extended thing in space. Now, Descartes is not his body, he is his mind. So, premise three says, my essential nature does not include being an extended thing in space, because Descartes is not his body, he is his mind or is his soul. Therefore, I am not identical with my body. And since I am a thinking thing, namely a mind, my mind is not identical with my body. There's a bit of a conceivability argument at work here. I wonder if any of you can spot it, or if any of you noted this part in the textbook. Well, firstly, what is a conceivability argument? A conceivability argument basically goes like this. A conceivable argument tries to show that something is conceivable, and then, because it is conceivable, makes an argument that it is possible. Sure, yeah, maybe. And if that's the case, Liam, then what's happening here is that we're begging the question. That's what that means. Yeah, Paul, same thing. Maybe this is a bit of a question begging argument. And again, this is not exactly how Descartes puts it, but it is Cartesian. Yeah, sure, I repeat that for you. So a conceivability argument argues that because something is conceivable, it is possible. So, for example, let's see if you buy this conceivability argument. I can conceive of a winged horse. Therefore, winged horses are logically possible. Maybe. Even if you buy that, are winged horses physically possible? I don't know. I doubt it. Seems like the kind of thing that wouldn't really work, right? A horse with wings? What? That's silly. Maybe one of these genetic engineering companies, like those guys that brought back the dire wolves, right? Well, they didn't really bring back the dire wolves. They just made regular wolves that were a little bit more dire. Um, but maybe one of those companies will put together a winged horse. I can't see it going spectacularly well. I think that horse would be like, "Oh, kill me," it wouldn't be very nice for the horse. So let's not do that. Um, so, but this is real. This is in there in Descartes, right? His essential nature is that he is a thinking thing. That's what he really is. He's not his body. His mind is better known than his body, and he knows with certainty that whatever else he is a thinking thing. And he knows that the essential nature of his body, and indeed all bodies, is not to be a thinking thing, but to be an extended thing. And his essential nature is not to be extended. His mind is not extended in space because it's not material. So he can't be identical with his body. But the conceivability argument is whether you can conceive of a mind that is not physical. And a lot of us now might have problem with that, with doing that, because a lot of us know about the brain, right? Huh. Yeah. Oh, good point, Lee. Yeah, they did make them white. To be like, yeah, like Game of Thrones. Well, like Jon Snow's direwolf, Ghost, right? He was the white one. Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I think the science is interesting. But it there's a lot of window dressing there, right? Like these are dire wolves. Well, they're wolves that are just like I said, they're a little more dire. They have characteristics that are a little bit more like dire wolves, but genetically they are not dire wolves. Um, Like if you made an elephant that was a bit more hairy, that doesn't make it a woolly mammoth, right? Um, I'm sure they're working on that. I'm sure they're making hairy elephants that they can call woolly mammoths, you know. Uh, that's not a woolly mammoth. They're just tweaking the genes. They're not getting like direwolf DNA and using only that. Kind of like how in Jurassic Park, even in Jurassic Park, they had to mix up some frog DNA in there. And we all know how that turned out. So, yeah. So Holly agrees. He's not identical with his body. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, maybe the mammoths will be proper mammoths. But then again, like, should we bring them back? I don't know. This is a whole like a whole ethical rabbit hole we could go down. But yeah, maybe Descartes is not identical with his body. But that doesn't make them completely separate. Yeah, like you're not your kidneys, but you need your kidneys. Well, an embodied cognitive scientist, like somebody who agrees with embodied cognition, would say, no, maybe you are though, right? Not completely, but yeah. So there's a conceivability argument. The conceivability argument seems to be like, can you have a non-material mind, a mind that exists without a body? And sure, we can conceive of that. Like that's what ghosts are. But conceivability does not necessarily entail logical possibility nor physical possibility. So that's why this is a bit tricky. Yeah, you can lose your arms and still think, but there would be some things that you might not be able to do anymore, like count on your fingers, right? How would we prove it? Sorry, Yosef, how would we prove what? Can you expand on that? I missed the bit that you're asking. I missed the thing you're asking how we could prove. Yeah, okay, yeah. So I mean, yeah, that's kind of the idea, right? Like we can conceive of that. And indeed, we have. And a lot of us do, right? Like I just finished teaching philosophy of the paranormal, and we had a unit on ghosts, right? We can conceive of ghosts, but if ghosts are non-physical, if they are essentially like minds without bodies, how do they affect the physical, right? How would we show that they are real if they're in fact non-physical? Well, yeah, Liam, okay, that's fair, but remember that thinking is one of the essential characteristics of a mind, right? I think we would all agree on that, right? Thinking is what makes you a mind. Maybe there's more to it, but we all agree that one of there might be many potential marks of the mental. We're kind of talking a lot about them here, right? Direct access, the private, subjective nature, representational, the representational nature of mental states, the intentionality of mental states. But we all agree that thinking is mental, right? So. Argument five. I'm trying to move a little bit more quickly through these because I don't think I'm even halfway through the slides yet, and we have less than an hour to go. So, argument five. If anything is material, it is essentially material. Its essential nature as a material thing or an extended thing is that it is material or extended. However, I am possibly immaterial. That is, there is a possible world in which I exist without a body. Hence, I am not essentially material. Hence, it follows with the first premise that I am not material. There's still a bit of a conceivability argument here, right? Can we conceive of a possible world in which I exist without a body? And if we can, what does that even mean? Now, I want to note something. This is a modal argument. This deals with what's logically possible. Lots of things are logically possible. But again, logical possibility does not entail physical possibility, right? It's conceivable. This is the example Kim uses. It's conceivable that we could go faster than the speed of light, right? Think about it. Star Wars, they've got hyperspace, right? They go into hyperspace. On Star Trek, warp drive. They literally bend space and time around the ship so that it's like the ship is moving faster than light, when really it's not moving at all. The space and time around the ship are what are moving. And many other examples, right? Um, okay. And so it's conceivable. It's even logically possible. Like it's not logically contradictory in any way to suppose that we could travel faster than light. Is it physically possible though? No, it is not. The speed of light is the fastest anything can go in this universe. So it's conceivable, it's logically possible, doesn't mean it's physically possible. So maybe you can't conceive of a possible world where you can exist without a body. Fair. Maybe you can. Well, then it's logically possible that you could exist without a body because there's another possible world where you exist without a body. Does that mean it's physically possible for you to exist without a body? No, it does not. How could I exist without a body anyway? What would that even be like? Senses, it gets a little tricky here, Liam. The sense organs are certainly features of the body. Sensation and perception are mental states and mental processes. Of course, an embodied theorist would say, the lines aren't really clear cut. Um, if you lose direct access to the perception of your arm, like maybe your arm gets cut off, you lose part of your mind. I would say no. I would say no. But there might be some things, again, some things you can't do anymore, right? Like you couldn't use your hand as a cognitive tool, like for counting on your fingers, right? But your mind is still there. Okay, so what do you think? Are any of you able to conceive of a possible world where you could exist without a body? And if so, what would that be like for you? What is it that you're envisioning there? Like for me, um, um, good question, Paul. Like for me, I can conceive of a world where I exist without a body. Like Hayden said, yeah, just now in the comments, like I could conceive of a world where maybe we can upload ourselves into computers or something, right? And then maybe we could then be placed in robot bodies. I don't know. Then we'd really be ghosts in machines, wouldn't we? Um, so I can conceive of that, and there's no logical impossibility there, right? Logically, it's perfectly fine. I could, I could, I could be placed um, in a computer or a robot body or something. Is it physically possible though? That's another question. Yeah, upload is a lot of fun. It's kind of like, it's very anti-capitalist, which I kind of like about it. But yeah, it's basically about a digital afterlife. And the wealthy people who can afford it, their minds inhabit this resort, this lovely place. And then there are people that are like on the poor people have like only so many gigabytes worth of bandwidth a month, and they live in this like horrible basement place. And after they run out of band, it's like how you maybe used to get minutes for your cell phone, and when you run out of minutes, you can't make a call. Once they run out of bandwidth, they just kind of freeze until it starts again the next month. It's so dark. Um, yeah. Um, yeah, yeah. Holly, yeah, I didn't mark that paper. One of the TAs got to it before I did, but I will read that. Um, yeah, like how could it be possible? But you're dealing with questions. Definitely with a topic like that, you're dealing with like what's conceivable, what's logically possible, and what's physically possible. Very cool. Yeah, Paul, yeah, no, yeah, but that wouldn't be this body. But it kind of speaks to the point, right? Like if I could take my mind, upload it to a computer, put that computer in a robot, that would show that my mind is not identical with my body, or that I am not identical with my body. Or maybe they could just leave me in the computer, right? Maybe I have a virtual body in some kind of computer program, like the Matrix. Yeah. Oh, there's a bunch like that. Well, did you all see the episode San Junipero? That was like the one happy one where these two women are like they fall in love, and one of them's spends some time in this virtual world because they're like in a coma or something. So they kind of live in this virtual world. Another one just goes there from time to time. Anyway, they fall in love and decide to upload and live happily ever after. And everybody's like, "Oh, what a happy episode!" But I'm kind of like, "Is it?" Because they're just in there. What if the power goes out? I don't know. But Black Mirror, yeah, sometimes they explore this stuff well. Sometimes it's terrible. I kind of love and hate Black Mirror. Some episodes I love, and some I'm like, this is so stupid. Like, so it's hit and miss for me, but it is a very imaginative show, and yeah, don't store your consciousness in RAM. A good one. Um, all right. So the takeaway, if you buy this argument, is that whatever I'm essentially immaterial. Oh, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, right. That's the one with Rashida Jones and Chris O'Dowd from the most recent season, right? Yeah, yeah. I liked that one. I like that one. Like you need to upgrade to the premium package uh to to not be depressed or to not be in a coma, and if you can't afford it, you just shut down. Um yeah, that one was wild. And then you can get like what the bliss package or and it's like you're on heroin the whole time or something. That's how it struck me. Like or yeah, if you leave your coverage area, you just go unconscious. Like it's so dark. Um, very cool. Um, all right, we better get moving. Argument 6. It asks us to suppose that we are identical with this body. So let's say me. Suppose I'm identical with this body of mine. Well, according to premise 1, in 2001, the year 2001, this body did not exist. Hence, from the first premise, it follows that I did not exist in 2001. But hang on, I existed in 2001. It's just struck me that a good number of you did not exist in 2001. So, oh my God, I'm getting old. So, but say it's me, right? I did exist in 2001. So there's a contradiction, and the supposition must be false. So I must not be identical with my body. Because now, my body is made of all different material than it was in 2001. Yeah. Well, it's crazy because now there's like an entire generation of people that I know did not watch 9/11 on when it happened on TV, which I think is why the Gen Zers make so many 9/11 memes. You had to be there. Um, it's not the kind of thing I would meme about. But yeah, it's pretty nuts. But even if you're younger than myself, right? Just switch the dates. Say like in 2015, right? This body did not exist, but then it would follow that you did not exist, but you did exist. So your supposition that you're identical with your body, or that you are not identical, that you are identical with your body must be false. This supposition here. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. There was a me who was there, but it's not the same me that's here right now. Or what is it Heraclitus said? In the same rivers we both step and do not step. Yeah, and the ship of Theseus too. So yeah, Heraclitus, ship of Theseus, transporter problem. If you like this stuff, you should read Parfit. It's very cool. And I like Thomas Metzinger too, as far as the no self views go. Parfit and Metzinger are probably my faves. Um, but yeah, and that's true. Like, so for the older people like myself and Paul, um, this body did not exist, but there was a self. And if you're a no self theorist or a bundle theorist, well, it's not the same self. Uh, it's the same. Well, it's not the same person. There is a person, but it's not the same you, right? Could we solve this problem though? Yeah, I think so. I'm not trying to throw shade by being like, oh, Gen Z needs to stop making 9/11 memes, as if you're all doing that. I'm just saying that I think the reason those exist are because, yeah, you had to be there. The whole post 9/11 world was nuts. So the world still is nuts, though, unfortunately. Mostly. Although we do form new neural connections and we do actually grow new neurons. It's called neurogenesis. It's because of that that something like neuroplasticity is possible. Oh, really? I didn't know that about the egg thing. Um, so can we solve the problem of continuity? I mean, maybe we can say it's not a problem. We could all just be no self theorists or bundle theorists and say like, don't even worry about don't even worry about it. In the same rivers we step and do not step, right? Yeah. Yeah, the self is a static thing is a weird notion. Yeah. Yeah, so you could do that. But how could we solve if we wanted to solve the problem of continuity, how could we do it? Besides saying like, okay, there is a self here now and there was a self there, but these two selves are different. How could we do it? Maybe we could do something like what John Locke did. John Locke argued that what makes you the same person as you are now is that there is a sort of continuity of consciousness. And what he means by that is a continuity of memory. And that's what makes you you, essentially. Or you could talk about four-dimensionalist metaphysics, where I'm this sort of like four-dimensional space-time, well, Kim calls it a worm, you know? There was a me that existed back then. And if you were to put it on like a four-dimensional graph, you would be like this worm thing that's continued to exist from the time you were born to up until the present. And the me that I am now is just a sort of time slice of that worm, right? Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? If I lose my memory, or if someone rewrites my memories, am I the same person? There's a lot of weird metaphysical stuff. Yeah. Well, the hippocampus is pretty neat. It has place neurons, it has time neurons. It's important for memory, right? The famous patient HM had most of his hippocampus removed to address his severe seizures, and he was not able to form new autobiographical memories after that, but he was able to form new procedural memories. So he was able to get better at tasks and skills that he didn't remember having learned how to do, which was pretty crazy. Um, Anyway, so those are a couple ways we can solve the problem of continuity. Maybe there's a psychological continuity, right? Maybe it doesn't matter bodily continuity, but psychological continuity or metaphysical continuity, right? So maybe like you can be like Locke and say like, well, I am still me because I have those memories, and that's what makes me me. Or I am just a one time slice out of this four-dimensional space-time being that began existence back in the day and still exists now. And the me that I am now is just this particular slice at this particular moment, right? This argument that argument 7 makes use of something called necessary identity. What that means, what is necessary? What does that mean? Necessary identity. Well, it means that if x is y, if x is identical to y, then necessarily x is identical to y, which means in every possible world, x must be identical to y. If x, the the name, for example, Josh Redstone, is me in this universe, that identity statement has to hold in every possible world, every logically possible world. The example Kim uses is that Cicero is Tully, right? Maybe for something a little more familiar to us, let's try and come up with a more familiar example. Well, if Bruce Wayne is Batman, it's logically necessary that Bruce Wayne is Batman in this universe and in every logically possible world as well. Bruce Wayne is just Batman. So suppose I am identical with this body of mine. So by the principle of necessary identity, I am necessarily identical with this body. That is, I am identical with it in any possible world, every possible world. But that's false because A, in some possible worlds, I could be disembodied and have no body. Or at least B, I could have a different body in another possible world. So it's false that I am identical with this body in every possible world, and this contradicts the second line. Therefore, I am not identical with my body. No, no. Logically possible worlds are hypothetical worlds that there is no logical contradiction in imagining their existence, or no problem logically with imagining their existence, right? So, another way of putting it is that like logically possible worlds are the worlds we imagine when we imagine counterfactual scenarios. So in this world, I like coffee. And I always drink coffee when I'm lecturing. But in another logically possible world, perhaps I prefer to drink tea, right? Nothing wrong with that. So in one world, this world, I'm a coffee drinker, but in world number one, world number two, whichever way you want to label it, I am actually a tea drinker, not a coffee drinker. It's logically possible. There's nothing, illogical about imagining a world where I drink tea during my lecture as opposed to coffee. Yeah, it's what could have been. What could have been. Not what logically could not have been, but what could have been. So, what this is saying is that if I am identical with my body, here, if x equals y, if I am my body, then necessarily I'm identical with my body. And that means, since it's logically necessary, that means in every possible world, I must be identical with my body. That's what the first premise says. But that can't be right because in some possible worlds, I could be disembodied or I could have a different body. So it's false that I'm identical with this body in every possible world. Therefore, I'm not identical with my body. What do we think? I don't buy, I mean, yeah, maybe. I do think maybe. Well, no, we don't have to prove it. We just have to show that it's logically possible. And it is. It might, but again, remember, it might not be physically possible for me to exist without a body, right? Maybe I cannot exist as a ghost with no body. Maybe I cannot be uploaded to a computer, right? Like Holly says, maybe it's just conceivable. And sure, if it's conceivable and logically possible, that doesn't entail it's physically possible. All right, in the interest of time, let's get to argument 8. Premise 1, thoughts and consciousness exist. Yeah, okay. I accept premise 1. Conclusion 1. Hence, there must be objects or substances to which thoughts and consciousness occur. That is, things that think and are conscious. Yeah, no problem. Consciousness exists, thoughts exist, and I'm one of those things that thinks and is conscious. Yeah, no problem so far. Okay, so premise 2. Thoughts and consciousness cannot occur to material things. They cannot be states of material objects like the brain. Conclusion 2. Thoughts and consciousness must occur to immaterial things like Cartesian mental substances, like res cogitans. And conclusion 3. Mental substances exist, and they are the things that think and are conscious and bear other mental properties. Well, I'm not so sure about this one. I deny the second premise. I'm not impressed with the second premise. Maybe thoughts and consciousness can occur to material things. Maybe the emergentists are right, and what we need is a certain level of complexity, right? Or maybe something like John Searle. Consciousness is a biological property, and you just need a brain for consciousness. But brains are physical, right? Lee says premise 2 is just made up. Yeah, I tend to agree. I reject it. Yeah, why should they not? That's a good question. Although, rhetorical questions don't suffice as arguments. But yeah, why can't they occur? We need a reason to believe that they cannot occur to material things, right? Um, yeah, yeah, maybe not material, but certainly physical. Or maybe, like we talked about last time, maybe there are mental properties and these are distinct from and irreducible to physical properties. So we're talking property dualism. Or like I mentioned a moment ago, maybe consciousness, maybe thinking, maybe that's an emergent property. And what you need is a system of sufficient complexity, like the brain. The brain is probably the most complicated sort of thing in the known universe. And this is really cool. Like, think about this. The average human brain contains about 86 billion neurons. And each of those neurons could be connected to anywhere from a few to thousands of other neurons. So we're talking trillions upon trillions of connections. Brains are the most complicated thing that we know about. So maybe the emergentists have a point. Um, if you can conceive of a counter argument, whoop. If you can conceive of a counter argument that is a reason against the argument, um, yeah, well, yeah, you can respond with a counter argument. That's what philosophers do that all the time. There's a sort of dialectical nature to what we do, right? Someone says this, I say this, right? So yeah, you can respond with a counter argument, absolutely. Um, yeah, Holly, I like the way you put that. Almost like you need critical mass, but instead of critical mass, it's critical complexity and critical organization, right? It's very Aristotelian, actually, if you think about it. Like, my body is the way it is because it's organized in the right sort of way. All of this could also be, you could just throw some water and some carbon and iron and calcium and everything into a bucket, and it would just be a big old bucket of goo. But if it's organized in the right way, it's a human being, right? And if it's complex enough, it's a thinking being. That's the idea. Um, but a philosopher named Leibniz agrees with this. And here's where we get to Leibniz's mill. Here's what Leibniz says. It must be confessed, moreover, that perception and that which depends upon it, like thinking, for example, are inexplicable by mechanical causes, that is, by figures and motions. Supposing there were a machine so constructed as to think, feel, and have perception, we could conceive of it as enlarged, and yet preserving the same proportions, so that we might enter it as into a mill. And this granted, we should only find, on visiting it, pieces which push one against another, but never anything by which to explain a perception. This must be sought for, therefore, in the simple substance, and not in the composite or in the machine. So Leibniz is not a dualist. Leibniz is a substance monist. But he still doesn't think that these mechanical processes can explain the mind or the mental. So he does agree with Descartes in that sense. And what's he saying here to try and illustrate this? What's the deal with all this talk about thinking machines and mills and so forth? Anyone want to take a stab at it? Well, like he said, imagine we could make a machine that thinks, and you could blow it up so that you could walk around in it. Or better yet, if you believe that the brain is responsible for cognition and for consciousness, um, then imagine you could either blow the brain up real big or shrink yourself down real small so that you could walk into the brain the way you could walk into a big old mill. No problem. Um, so you're walking around in the brain, you wouldn't see the thoughts, like Paul says. You wouldn't see consciousness, you wouldn't see perceptions. You'd just see neurons firing. And that's what Leibniz is saying here. And this is called Leibniz's mill. Do you agree or do you disagree? I mean, the point of this is to show that the mental is not the physical. And Leibniz and Descartes have a lot of dissimilarities, right? Descartes is a substance dualist. Leibniz is a substance monist. Descartes thinks there's extended substance and thinking substance and that they interact. Leibniz only thinks there's one kind of substance, monads, and there's no actual interaction. It's just a pre-established harmony, pre-established by God, such that there appears to be causation, but really it's all pre-established harmony. Um, um, so Liam says the system is the thinking, not the individual neurons. Yeah, okay. Um, Leibniz would still disagree with you. I agree with you. Leibniz wouldn't, right? Yeah, Paul, you're right. The firing of neurons maps to brain states and thoughts. But the question is whether the firing of neurons and all of that is identical with the thoughts, right? And if so, how? Like, like it sounds like maybe what you're doing here is a bit of identity theory, right? Mental states are just brain states, right? Whereas what Liam is doing is maybe more like a functionalist. It's the system and how it works, right? Holly says if you walked into the brain, you might see an apparatus, but not the interpretations, the observer who owns the apparatus. Yeah, maybe. It's like Kim has already gestured at this idea. The mind isn't something we have. The mind is more like a process. We don't have a mind so much as we um, mentate, a verb, right? Having a mind is not like having a thing. Having a mind is existing in a certain sort of way. Maybe. But then we have the worry of the homunculus problem. Who is observing it and how does that work? Do you see what I mean? Right? Like imagine there's an ego or a self that observes the brain and that's you. Well, then how does that work? Like it's kind of like just to take it back to the ghost in the machine, right? Like if my body is like a I don't know, like a giant robot from some anime or something, then my mind is like the pilot of the robot. But how does the pilot of the robot work? Does he have a little guy inside his head, right? Is it like a Ratatouille situation, except it's Ratatouille's all the way down? That's the homunculus problem. Um, well, yeah, I mean, observer theories, though, they all suffer from this problem. Like, who is doing the seeing? There's no little guy in my mind doing the seeing. But maybe the mind perceives itself. Hmm. Yeah. So getting back to this, who agrees with Leibniz and who disagrees? I disagree with Leibniz, by the way. That's just, just so you know, disclosing that now. Maybe Leibniz is making a bit of a category mistake here. It's like if you shrink yourself down into the brain, you're not going to like see a thought or see qualia. Of course not, because that's not what they are. They're not objects, they're processes, right? And yeah, so yeah, that's fair, Holly. If you need to still sit with it, that's fine. I want you guys to sit with this. I don't want you guys to just automatically agree with everything I say, or everything Kim, or Descartes, or Leibniz says. I want you to think about it. And if you disagree with me, fine, good. Because what I'm really trying to do is teach you about thinking, right? I'm not trying to teach you the right answer. Well, I'm trying to teach you the right answers. But I'm trying to give you the tools where you can think about things and arrive at the answer yourself. And a lot of this stuff, yeah, it takes it really takes a lot of you got to get your neurons pumping. I'll put it that way. Because we are so used to thinking of our minds in a certain sort of way, because we experience our own minds in a certain sort of way, that it's hard to think outside of that box, right? Um, Dualism, the idea that the self is a unified, continuously existing entity, the possibility that minds are immaterial and bodies are material. These are very intuitive ideas. This is how our experience makes it seem to us. Our experience makes it seem to us that minds are different than bodies, and that selves are maybe these stable, continuously existing entities. Um, But we might be mistaken about that because our own experience of our own minds leads us astray. You know the term grok? Not Elon Musk's stupid AI, but Robert Heinlein's term grok from the story, I believe it's Stranger in a Strange Land, right? When you grok something, you get it, right? You get it. Um, we very easily we grok dualism. We grok the possibility that the mind is immaterial, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the way it is. Um, well, that's the thing, Kev. And I'm paraphrasing Daniel Dennett here. Not one of the cells in your brain knows anything, or believes anything, or perceives anything. It's the whole system that does that. Like, how do we look at the pure cells and see how it sees the environment? The cells don't know anything. They don't see anything. It's the action of the whole system. Then again, Dennett is somewhat of a functionalist, so that's why he makes that argument. I don't know if we'll get all the way through this, but we'll try. Okay, let's get to Princess Elizabeth. Here's Princess Elizabeth. I got this picture from Wikipedia. Princess Elizabeth seems to have been a very interesting person. She's pictured here with her favorite hunting spear. That's what this is. So you can imagine that Elizabeth would have been out there in the forests of Bohemia, I don't know, hunting wild boar, and then going home and writing letters to Descartes about how Descartes is wrong about everything. Quite cool, quite a cool figure, I must say. Unfortunately, the history of women in philosophy is it's quite impoverished because many women were not able or allowed to do it, either because of their it was because of the views, the society views of women, um, and also socioeconomic conditions, right? If you were a philosopher, it's because you had access to an education, right? Um, More men could do that because more of them would be sent to schools or maybe to monasteries in some cases. If you were a woman and you wanted to do philosophy, you had to be probably pretty affluent. You had to have time and money. And Princess Elizabeth had those things. But that's not to say that we might not have seen many more women philosophers if society had been a little bit different. I love working at Carleton University because we got a pretty good split. I think as of now it's around 50-50, or maybe there might even be more women professors than men professors in the philosophy department. But we've achieved a pretty good gender parity there, which I think is pretty neat. Um, oh, good. Yeah, Kaya, that's good. Thank you for the recommendation. I think I might have to read that. So here's Princess Elizabeth. She's concerned about what Descartes says here in the sixth meditation. Descartes says, the mind is not immediately affected by all parts of the body, but only by the brain, or perhaps just by one small part of the brain. Every time this part of the brain is in a given state, it presents the same signals to the mind, even though the other parts of the body may be in a different condition at the time. For example, when the nerves in the foot are set in motion in a violent and unusual manner, this motion, by way of the spinal cord, reaches the inner parts of the brain, and there gives the mind its signal for having a certain sensation, namely the sensation of pain as occurring in the foot. This stimulates the mind to do its best to get rid of the cause of the pain, which it takes to be harmful to the foot. Okay, I mean, that's pretty easy to follow. Can go the other way as well. And the activity of the soul, he continues, consists entirely in the fact that simply by willing something, it brings it about. That little gland to which it is closely joined moves in the manner required to produce the effect corresponding to this desire. Descartes thinks that's the pineal gland. It's a gland in your brain, which we know now is actually an important part of the endocrine system, if I'm not mistaken. So the pineal gland has something to do with producing certain important hormones. Um, You can get disorders of the pineal gland, that affect like growth hormone, or no, that's the pituitary gland. You can get a disorder of the pineal gland, I believe, that's called diabetes insipidus, which is where you get an overproduction of hormones that basically make you have to go pee all of the time, right? So we know it's probably not the seat of the soul, but Descartes might have thought it was because um, the brain contains two hemispheres, which are kind of like mirror images of one another, but not the pineal gland. It's just there's just one of those. So maybe he thought it was important for that reason. But he's saying that the environment affects the body in such a way. The animal spirits cause changes in the nerves and the brain, which impact the pineal gland, which affects the soul. So that's how, for example, you stub your toe when you feel pain. But it could go the other way too. Like I can will myself to, I don't know, take a sip of coffee, right? That, according to Descartes, is my immaterial soul affecting the pineal gland, affecting my animal spirits and my nerves and muscles and causing me to produce an action, right? So that's pretty straightforward. Um, Now, here comes Princess Elizabeth, very astute. She says the following in a letter to Rene Descartes. She says, explain, please, quote, how the mind of a human being, being only a thinking substance, can determine the bodily spirits in producing bodily actions. For it appears that all determination of movement is produced by the pushing of the thing being moved, by the manner in which it is pushed, by that which moves it, or else by the qualification and figure of the surface of the latter. Contact is required for the first two conditions. You have to be touching for something, pushing something else to move the thing being pushed. And the way it pushes it, you need contact for either of those. And you need qualification and figure of the surface in case of those things too. We need contact for that. We need extension for the third. When we're talking about qualification and figure, we're talking about the physical characteristics of the thing doing the pushing. So you need contact and extension. But she continues, you entirely exclude the latter from the notion you have of the soul, and the former seems incompatible with an immaterial thing. So basically, what Elizabeth is challenging Descartes to do is explain how an immaterial mind affects a material body, and how a material body could possibly affect an immaterial mind. This is called the mind-body problem, or the mind-body interaction problem. Descartes responds, somewhat unsatisfactorily. I observe that there are in us certain primitive notions which are, as it were, the originals on the pattern of which we form all other thoughts. As regards the mind and body together, we have only the primitive notion of their union, on which depends our notion of the mind's power to move the body, and the body's power to act on the mind and cause sensations and passions. It's just a primitive notion or a brute fact. How do the mind and body interact? Well, they just do. I mean, look, come on. You stub your toe, you feel pain, and you go, ouch. You decide, I'm going to have some coffee, and so you do. You pick it up and take a sip. That's just how it works, Princess Elizabeth. I mean, really, Descartes? Really? Are we satisfied with this? Princess Elizabeth wasn't. Are any of you? Not satisfied? Circular? Nope, not entirely. Good, good, good. Yeah. I don't agree with Descartes. I'm on the side of Princess Elizabeth. She responds, which is I've called it a mic drop moment, but it's very apt. I admit, she wrote, that it would be easier for me to concede matter and extension to the mind than it would for me to concede the capacity to move a body and be moved by one to an immaterial thing. And this might be the first causal argument for materialism or physicalism that we see in modern philosophy. I'll have to check the date on this correspondence because I think Kim is maybe forgetting about Thomas Hobbes. Um, they were contemporaries, and Hobbes was actually absolutely like a mechanistic thinker. Um, who probably would have agreed with Princess Elizabeth. I'm not sure if Elizabeth would have been familiar with Hobbes's work or Hobbes with her correspondence with Descartes, although Thomas Hobbes and Descartes were familiar with each other's work, and indeed would have probably known each other through correspondence. But this could be one of the first causal arguments for materialism. Well, a gravitational field is physical. It's not material, but it's physical. By immaterial, we would here mean non-physical. At least that's how Kim is presenting it. Although some people have proposed the idea of a mental field or a conscious field akin to, like a gravitational field or an electromagnetic field. But often those people that propose this means something non-physical. But a gravitational field or an electrical field or a magnetic field, these are physical, but they're not material. But we're reading Elizabeth as saying non-physical here. So I think this is really cool. What she is basically saying is like, look, Descartes, it's easier for me to grant extension to the mind than to say that a material thing can be affected by an immaterial thing. Boom, mic drop, Descartes. What do you think? I like Princess Elizabeth. I'm not gonna lie. I really like this. Um, I think that she's absolutely correct in pointing this problem out. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, good, good, good. How far can we get? Well, the pairing problem. You know what? I think we better save this for next time. Holly says, that is the only way I could think to try and support Descartes after she retorts. Like a field and we're like radio's picking up a signal. Yeah. Yeah, and you have to stretch that out. And even then, it's like, is this field, we all agree this field, we'll call it a force field, okay? Like following the physicists. It's definitely non-material, but is it non-physical? And remember that physicalism is the contemporary successor to materialism. Physicalism includes all of the things that like a physicist would study. So not just matter, but also like energy, force fields, other properties like, mass, inertia, stuff like that. These are physical. These are all physical, right? So yeah. So yeah, this would have to be a physical field rather than a non-physical sort of field. Yeah, maybe. You're not wrong, Paul. I'm just saying that some of the people who have tried to make this argument, um, it sounds like a pretty non-physical field. Yeah. Then again, you'll have to read some of these people to get to know what I mean. I mean, I'm thinking of, well, I forget the exact thinker it's associated with, but. Check out Susan Blackmore's book on consciousness. You'll see what I mean. She provides a nice overview of this. It's a great book if you're interested in consciousness, and I use the second edition when I teach a first year seminar on consciousness. And you can get that edition in digital format from the Carleton Library, just like you can with Kim's book. If you're interested in consciousness, it's a really super accessible, fun to read book. Um, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, Liam. Like that, you're Liam. You're saying what Princess Elizabeth says exactly, almost exactly the same thing. Like if it's not physical, how's it affected, or how's it affecting or being affected by the physical? I'd rather say the mind is physical than say that an immaterial mind can affect and be affected by the material. Yeah, so to summarize, Descartes is saying it's just a sort of primitive notion or a brute fact. Like it's just the basics. Like, look, there are minds, there are bodies. They interact. That's how it works. And Elizabeth is saying, well, it can't just be the mind can't be immaterial then. Because how on earth does that work? I'd sooner grant that minds are material than that the immaterial can affect and be affected by the material. That's what she's saying. Yeah, Hayden, the name is Consciousness, an Introduction by Susan Blackmore. I use the second edition. It's a very good book. It's super accessible. There are lots of little exercises you can do, lots of little examples, and it's just fantastic book. It's a if you want to know about consciousness, read this book. It's so good. Um, right? Yeah, yeah, he's kind of yeah, maybe he's a bit of a I'm not saying he's a shyster or a con artist or anything like the Wizard of Oz, but Descartes is also, Descartes is a man um writing in a time with with a woman student who, women didn't have the same rights, social standing, and all of that as they do today. A lot of people at the time believed that women weren't capable of pursuing an education. And maybe Descartes is thinking like, there, princess. This is just how it works. But Princess Elizabeth was a heck of a lot smarter than that, right? So, um, okay, so last thing, what Joshua says here. I feel like the mind cannot be completely separated from the body. For example, if you have two worlds, the first world, you are just normal you, but in the second world, you were born blind. In the first way, you think as you normally do and you are able to imagine objects. Yeah, okay, I see. In the other world, you have never been able to, you have never seen before, meaning your mind is unable to imagine objects with colors, shapes, etc. If the mind was completely independent of the body, then theoretically, shouldn't the minds be the same? Yes, allowing you to imagine objects. However, we know this is not the case. That is great. That's great. That's a great imaginative example uh, that really illustrates the idea of embodiment. So that is great. I think you could probably do something with this for your first reflection assignment. And we could probably keep this going in the Discord server. So class is over for today. We're 2 minutes over time, probably because I spent so much time going on about Plato in the beginning. Um, So we're going to talk about pairing problems and immaterial minds in space next time. So we'll finish this, then we'll get on to behaviorism. So please read the stuff on behaviorism for next time. But before we get to that, we'll finish this. Okay? Yes, we did. Check that out. Check that out, Samantha, and let me know if you have questions. Thanks, everybody. This was a lot of fun. See, even though I disagree with Descartes, still a lot of fun. A lot of fun to read, a lot of fun to talk about, a lot of fun to critique. I think we managed to be quite charitable in our discussion of Descartes, even though many of us seem to disagree with him. And I hope we all learned something today. So we'll pick it up again on Monday, next Monday, and then we'll get on to some behaviorism. So we'll have quite a bit of a time jump between Descartes and the behaviorists. But thanks, everyone. I will see you on Monday. Have a good rest of your week and enjoy your weekend. All right. Bye for now.